Savannah, Georgia, June 3rd, 1855. Before Naomi could write her name, she could smell death. It lived in the kitchen hearth, rising with steam, seeping into the seams of aprons, salted into every cut of meat. On Evermore Plantation, just outside Savannah, death was not sudden. It simmered. Naomi was 9 when she learned heat could lie, not the warmth of a stove, but the hiss of a branding iron pressed to her cousin's spine. He screamed. She didn't blink. That sound stayed with her. Dinah, the cook, taught Naomi to stir broth from bones, to stitch torn flesh with a fish spine, to bury grief in bread dough. Dinah's hand smelled of rosemary and ash. "Spice hide sorrow," she said. One morning, Dinah used too much wormwood in the master's tea. They called it poison. Naomi called it mercy. They dragged Dinah to the forge and made Naomi watch. When it was done, they tossed what was left into the swamp. That night, Naomi crept into the root cellar, pulled Dinah's cleaver from under the sack of rice, and whispered her first promise: "I will make them eat it." Evermore Plantation, autumn, 1859. By 13, Naomi was the only cook left in the big house. Thin, fast, quiet. The new mistress said she had clever fingers. The overseer said she had sharp eyes. The master said nothing, but ate every plate clean. Naomi served peach cobbler that stuck to the tongue like honey, rabbit stew that silenced rooms, honey-glazed quail that made white men speak kindly. Just for a moment, they called her gifted. They did not know she cooked with ghosts. Her broth bubbled with memory. Her fire remembered pain. The kitchen still held the smell of Dinah's sweat. Her cleaver stayed under Naomi's cot. The fireplace groaned like lungs remembering smoke. One morning, while sweeping ash from under the hearth, Naomi's foot caught on a board. Loose. She pried it up. Below, wrapped in cloth eaten by rot, was a rusted tin box. Inside, a ledger, thin, brittle, pages cracked like dry leaves. It wasn't in English, not all of it. Some parts were symbols, bones, half-moons, crossed knives. Others were names, marked with initials and dates. The writing sloped like it was drawn under candlelight. And one word, carved in red ink across the center: remember. She turned the pages slowly. Each name was followed by a symbol. She did not recognize most of them, but the last page was blank. She placed it back in the box. Then she added one name: Dinah. That night, Naomi walked through the big house alone, past the library with its books locked behind glass, past the parlor with its velvet chairs and piano never played. She counted steps, measured shadows, memorized the creak of each stair, the squeak of door hinges, the pattern of moonlight on the hall floor. The next day, she served a pork shoulder basted in molasses and vinegar. The men groaned. The mistress said it was the best yet. Naomi smiled and said thank you. That evening, she sharpened the cleaver until the sound rang like a bell against stone. She marked the ledger again, a small bone shape. Then she hid it beneath the floorboard once more. By winter, the ledger had 3 marks. No names, just symbols: bone, crescent, knife. Naomi never asked what they meant. She simply knew when to use them. Her cooking changed. Her stew turned darker. Her biscuits crumbled more easily in the mouth. And always, she added one ingredient that had no name. The pantry became a cathedral of silence. Jars lined the shelves like altars. Salted meat, preserved peaches, fat rendered into candles. And tucked behind the cider jugs, wrapped in cloth, jars marked not with labels, but with faint carved initials. She worked alone. Sometimes, she hummed Dinah's tune while stirring. Outside, the fields ripened. The cotton sang when plucked. The cane bent low under the weight of sun. Naomi watched from the kitchen window. She watched the overseer lash a boy named Elijah for whistling during work. She watched Clara disappear after being called to barn. She never saw them again. But the bones she boiled that night were small. That week, the rabbit stew had a richer flavor. The men praised it. Naomi smiled. She added 2 more marks to the ledger, one shaped like a flame, one like an eye. When she served supper, she whispered into each bowl, Clara, Elijah, Then she watched them eat. Evermore Plantation, spring 1860. They began to disappear without sound. No alarms, no notices, no word spoken beyond the walls of the slave quarters. Just absence. One day, Elijah was shelling peas on the back step, humming. The next morning, he was gone. Clara, too. She'd been seen hanging laundry near the barn. Naomi saw the overseer pull her inside. No one saw her after. No burial. No funeral. No crying aloud. Only the quiet, which grew louder each day. The masters claimed runaways. Fever, said the mistress, when asked by her guests. But Naomi kept track. She counted the missing, noted the time of day, the scent left behind. Elijah's corner in the quarters still smelled of citrus. Clara's bowl still had rice stuck to its rim. Naomi saw what others refused. Nothing runs when there's nowhere to run. She opened the ledger again, turned to the page after Dinah's mark. She added Elijah, then Clara, then others whose names came only in whispers, boys with crooked spines, girls who bled after being summoned to the stables. She added marks beside their names, lines slashed downward like falling rain, one for each vanished, one for each cry swallowed by wood and wind. The pages darkened. The pantry grew fuller. One night, while the house slept under a heavy moon, Naomi walked to the smokehouse. She moved with the stillness of someone who did not need to sneak. Inside, beneath cured hams and hanging sausage, she kept a jar no one else touched. Within it floated something pale, hard, clean, round. It looked like a knuckle. Only one person had seen it. A boy named Henry, 9 years old, who helped sweep the kitchen and carry firewood. Small, silent. He'd come upon it by accident. He didn't scream. He asked only, "Miss Naomi, was that pork?" She said nothing. Instead, she handed him a warm roll from the oven and watched him eat it in silence. He nodded, solemn, and never asked again. That night, Naomi opened the ledger and drew a new symbol, an eye with a line through it, a witness, loyal. The vanishings became rhythm, like a song the house refused to hear. One overseer noticed a drop in numbers. "Where's the new girl?" he muttered at breakfast. The master shrugged. "She's sick?" The mistress sipped her tea. "Perhaps." Naomi poured coffee with steady hands. They praised the biscuits. They laughed. They passed around peach preserves. No one noticed the new sharpness to the pork, the bitterness behind the glaze. Naomi added another mark, a curl like steam. She sharpened the cleaver again. Later that week, a guest arrived, Master Amos Bell. He came drunk, as always, trailing cigar smoke and bile. Naomi had heard of him from Dinah, who once said, "That man don't believe in mercy, even for beasts." He stayed in the guest room with velvet curtains, ate heavily, laughed too loud. On the third night, he tried to drown a house girl in a washtub. She survived. He didn't. They said, he slipped on the wet floor. Naomi said nothing. That week's stew was thick, dark, spiced with cinnamon bark and bitter oil. One of the guests said it reminded him of his mother's Sunday table. Naomi almost laughed. Almost. She added a symbol beside his name in the ledger, a broken circle, half-filled. 7 names now. 7 vanishings. The ledger began to smell faintly of vinegar and ash. She pressed each new entry in silence, kneeling on the cold floor beneath the hearth. By midsummer, the whispers had grown. Among the enslaved, no one spoke Naomi's name after dark. They said she cooked with bones, that she stirred sorrow into the soup, that if you crossed her, you might not wake. But they never stopped eating, because her food quieted the hunger. It soothed the pain. And in a world without justice, silence tasted like survival. The masters kept hosting dinners. They called themselves the Savannah Supper Society. 12 men, all landowners, all white, all fat with profit. Every Friday, they gathered in the Rawls dining hall with wine in their cups and Naomi's food on their plates. They called her a miracle in the kitchen. She served them stew. She served them roast. She served them pieces of the silence they created. Each week, she whispered a name into the pot. Elijah, Clara, Dinah. Each week, she made another mark, 8 of 12 now. The vanishings no longer needed explanation. They became expectation. Naomi still worked alone. The kitchen never cooled. The flames whispered when she stirred. Evermore Plantation, summer 1860. Every Friday, 12 white men sat around the Rawls table with full bellies and empty eyes. They were planters, judges, merchants, men who spoke in low tones and laughed with wine-wet teeth. They called themselves the Savannah Supper Society. To others, they were names carved into deeds, laws, ledgers. To Naomi, they were a list, a count, a ledger of flesh. She cooked for them. They called her a miracle, a genius, a gift. Said her stews tasted like home, that her quail reminded them of childhoods spent beneath magnolias in summer heat. They never asked why the meat melted so easily on their tongues. They never questioned the thickness of the broth, the way it clung to the bowl. Naomi served them with grace. They never saw the ledger hidden under floorboards, or the cleaver polished smooth with oil and memory. 9 marks now. 3 remained. Each Friday, the table gleamed with silver, candles carved from old fat, plates stacked with duck, rabbit, lamb. Naomi walked in silence between the chairs. She wore a clean apron. Her shoes did not creak. Her face did not shift. She watched them. She listened to their stories. Rumors of war, of markets rising, of Negro unrest in other counties. They laughed when they spoke of it. One said, "Ours are too well fed to rebel." Another said, "Feed them well, beat them better. That's the law of land and stock." Naomi poured wine. Her hands did not tremble. That night, the meat was salted just enough to sting the tongue. She'd soaked it in a brine thick with secrets, rosemary, cloves, and a touch of something she ground from a root the old women once called forgetting powder. They ate. They moaned. They called her blessed. 10. The boy Henry helped clean after. He moved like wind, barefoot, light, invisible. He knew not to ask questions anymore. He watched, but he did not speak. Naomi gave him a roll, and he nodded, solemn. Later, she drew a symbol beside his. A second closed eye, witness kept, mouth sealed. She sharpened the cleaver again. The 11th man was Master Josiah Tull. He ran sugar boats along the coast. Once a week he came with a new girl on his arm, never the same twice. Naomi had seen him watching the quarters too long at night, standing beneath her window with his hat in hand. One Friday he did not come. They said he took ill. Naomi stirred the stew with slow, careful circles. In it, she whispered his name, Josiah. She marked the ledger, a snake uncoiling. 11. Only one remained. Judge Camden Doyle. He was different. He prayed before he ate. He wore a Bible on his belt. He kept his cuffs clean, his speech clear. But Naomi had seen him sneak down to the quarters after dark. She knew which door he knocked on. She knew what silence followed. He would not be easy. He carried law like a shield. He spoke righteousness while brushing dust from his boots. Naomi began her preparations early. She dried herbs by moonlight. She ground bark into powder. She soaked beans in water drawn from the far well, the one that tasted of copper. She saved her best honey, her finest lard. She washed the silver herself. The final supper had to be more than food. It had to be legacy. A closing line written in blood and fat and smoke. She set the table with 12 plates. Only one would remain. Evermore Plantation, late summer, 1860. The smokehouse was Naomi's sanctuary. By day, it smelled of hickory and brine. By night, it breathed secrets, soft and warm, like a body pressed to earth. No one entered it without her leave, not even the overseer, not even the mistress. But Henry did. 9 years old, thin as wire, quick-footed, quiet-tongued. He moved through the world like a shadow too small to fear. He swept the kitchen, fetched onions, peeled potatoes with a dull blade he never questioned. He never asked where the meat came from. Only once did he step where he shouldn't. Naomi was hanging sausages when he appeared in the doorway. "I brought the wood," he whispered, holding an armful of sticks. She turned. Behind her, half covered in burlap, sat a jar. It was open. Inside, a pale shape, smooth and round. Henry stepped closer. "Is that pork?" he asked, voice low. Naomi looked at him, said nothing. She walked to the oven, broke a roll in half, and handed him the warm piece. He took it without question. He ate in silence. That night, Naomi opened a ledger and drew a new symbol beside the closed eye. A flame curled inward, a promise sealed, a life spared. She had chosen. Henry was not food. He was memory. She gave him a second roll the next day. He never asked again. Evermore Plantation, early autumn 1860. The tent did not vanish quietly. Master Amos Bell arrived drunk, as always. His boots tracked mud across the dining rug. His voice carried like a whip through the halls. He slapped a field boy for looking too long at the fire. Naomi watched from the kitchen door, her face still, her hands folded in her apron. That evening, he demanded more cider, more meat, more attention. The girl he cornered in the laundry room, her name was Ruth, barely spoke. She carried linens in trembling arms. She didn't cry when he grabbed her wrist. She didn't scream when he dragged her toward the washtub, but she fought. Naomi heard the crash, the shouts, the silence that followed. Ruth returned to quarters with a torn sleeve and eyes wide as dawn. Master Bell did not return at all. They said he slipped. Naomi said nothing. She boiled the stew with bark and bay leaf, added a powder she crushed from a seed kept wrapped in blue cloth. The meat was darker than usual. She let it simmer longer. She let it thicken until it moved slow in the pot. That night, they ate in the parlor instead of the dining room. A storm rolled in. The shutters shook. The candles guttered low. Naomi served each man by hand. She ladled carefully. She set the bowls in front of them like offerings to a quiet God. They ate. They praised her. One man cried. "Esgioti, a taste of memory," he whispered, "like my mother's table. Sunday evenings." Naomi smiled. She wiped her hands on her apron. Later, she opened the ledger and added the tent symbol, a bowl with a drop inside it, blood in the pot, pain made into flavor. She didn't sharpen the cleaver that night. It was already sharp. She cleaned it slowly, edge to handle, polishing it with oil and salt. She whispered no name. The kitchen fire crackled. Rain tapped the shutters. Somewhere outside, a fox screamed in the cane. Evermore Plantation, mid-autumn, 1860. Trouble didn't come as a man. It came in a dress stitched with lace and lined with perfume. Margaret Holloway, cousin to the mistress, widow twice over, eyes sharp as needles. She arrived from Charleston with a gold-trimmed valise and questions stitched into every glance. She walked through the house like she owned it, rearranging pillows, asking names she forgot before the answers landed. But Naomi noticed how her gaze lingered in the wrong places, corners, cellars, the pantry. One morning, Margaret wandered where no guest should. Naomi was in the smokehouse when she heard the sound, soft leather heels on the pantry tiles. Too light to be the mistress, too slow to be a maid. Naomi entered the kitchen just as Margaret reappeared, pale, eyes wide. She clutched a handkerchief in one gloved hand. "What was in that jar?" she asked. Naomi said nothing. Margaret's hand trembled. There was a finger. She didn't scream then. Not yet. But that night, over dinner, she drank too much wine. Her words slipped. "There's something wrong in this house," she whispered. "Something foul." The men chuckled. "Too much Madeira," one said. "Too little Charleston," said another. Margaret rose early the next morning. She left without breakfast. She took the evening coach, left no forwarding address. Naomi returned to the pantry. The jar was gone. She found it beneath the floorboards, cleaned, sealed, marked now only with a thin red ribbon. Margaret would not return. But Naomi drew a symbol anyway. An open mouth struck through, a secret scene, a silence restored. The ledger swelled. The kitchen air thickened. Only two remained. Evermore Plantation, winter 1860. 12 plates, 12 candles, 12 names carved into memory. Only one remained. Judge Camden Doyle. The last, the most dangerous. He spoke with scripture and sentenced with smiles. He carried his Bible like a weapon. He walked like land belonged to him. He believed the world owed him its silence. But Naomi had been preparing. She pressed the linens herself, polished the silver until it mirrored flame. She trimmed the duck with orange peel and clove, glazed a roast with honey dark as molasses. The bread rose warm and thick with steam. Everything shimmered. The men gathered for the final supper. They praised the table. They poured wine. The fire cracked behind them, casting shadows across their faces. Naomi served the meal in silence. No apron, no scarf, just her. They laughed and raised glasses. They blessed the food. They tore into meat with greedy fingers. Naomi stepped to the head of the table. She looked at them one by one. Then she spoke. Only once. "You fed on us for decades," she said. "Tonight we return the favor." The doors locked from the outside. The room went still. Then the fire jumped. Oil spilled. The tablecloth caught first. The flames licked the walls, curled around the curtains, climbed the portraits of men who thought they'd live forever. The judge stood, shouted scripture. The others screamed. But Naomi did not move. She watched. The dining room burned. And with it, the ledger. The floorboard split. Ash fell like snow. She turned once, only once, toward the smokehouse where Henry waited beyond the fields. Then she walked into the night. The Rawls plantation never stood again. No one rebuilt. The land soured. Crops withered. Roots refused to grow. Locals whispered of a curse. But in kitchens across Georgia, her name passed from tongue to tongue like sacred salt. Naomi of Savannah, the cook who turned the table. Not out of madness, out of memory.